welcome everyone to episode 105 of the Murder Club. I'm just kidding. This is Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks, the internet's leading all things Charles Band podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jared Hornbeck, and Steve, I don't know where you are, but I'm sitting here waiting for you topless in the backyard. So where are you?
Well, I'm Steve Guntley, and I can't refuse a naked man who calls me honey. That actually worked out really well. That like both of our, you used my alt, so that for once, like we didn't grab the same one at the same time. This is the podcast all about murder clubs, double strangulations, and a basket full of remotes. I'm going to have a lot of thoughts about that basket full of remotes. That's because this is the podcast about Bleed, a hip early 2000s slasher that kicked off one of the shortest and strangest eras of Full Moon. Full Moon, as we know, is all about its eras. And this one is the Shadow Films era. We've touched on it a little bit before, and we're going to touch on that same movie a little bit again in this one.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into this one because as we were texting each other off mic, kind of bringing up some points about this movie. So I'm looking forward to tackling some of them online. Now, this is another one of these episodes that we did not bring on a guest to talk about this movie. It is just Steve and myself. So before we get into it, Steve, why don't you fire off a few stats about Bleed?
Absolutely. Bleed was released December 24th, 2002. Christmas movie. It was really directed by Devin Hamilton and Dennis Peterson, and it was written by Devin Hamilton. And it stars Debbie Rochon, Danny Wolski, Alan Neighbors, Orly Tepper, Ronnie Jean Blevins, Laura Nativo, Julie Strain, Brink Stevens, and Lloyd Kaufman popping up for the first time in one of our movies. Is this our first Lloyd?
So.
Yeah, I think so.
I know some people are firmly in like Team Band, Team Trauma. But we get some nice crossover here. And I feel like with Debbie Rochon, it's the same thing because I feel like she's been in a few things that we've talked about, but really I think of her as more a Trauma person.
I do too. I still associate her most strongly with Tromeo and Juliet. She kind of jumps back and forth. Like, I'm glad we get another chance to talk about Debbie Rochon because I think she is such an interesting figure. Like, she operates in the same. I think she is kind of like the Cate Blanchett of this world of film. Like, she is the one. On. She is weirdly versatile. She disappears into the roles that she plays. She plays things very intensely, but none of the movies that she ever appeared in were like reputable in any way, you know, like they and proudly so. Like, I don't mean to cast judgment on it, but like, but she's operating in the same world that like Julie Strain, for example, is operating in. But there's a weird amount of intensity and integrity that Debbie Rochon brings to these roles. And I think this one's no exception.
Well, you're right. I mean, she's definitely getting lost in this character, and it could seem a little bit out of place because everything that she's surrounded with looks and sounds like it's, B-roll footage of MTV's Spring Break.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. There's a big like early TRL vibe to this entire movie, which is part of its charm, I think, in an interesting way. Now, this is an interesting time because last week we talked about the movie Deadly Stingers, and this week, I think for the first time we're going chronologically, except, the Puppet Master 4 and 5 or whatever. But we're going like right in a row.
Chronologically, in the sense that we're not talking about two movies that were shot at the same time.
Right. Exactly.
Which I think we've done one or two times.
Yeah. But this would be movies that were released like one directly after the other. So we get to kind of follow the trajectory. We talked about Deadly Stingers last week, which is a very fun movie that I think we both enjoyed, but it was a problematic production. It was a big flop. It wound up not getting released properly on DVD until like 2013 or something like that. And it led to a parting of the ways between Charles Band and J.R. Bookwalter, who was the producer from Tempe Films and was kind of overseeing a lot of the movies for Full Moon in that era. Now, with Band being banned, it did not take him long to find someone new to take over the mantle at Full Moon, and that is Devin Hamilton, ushering in the Shadow Films era. Now, we previously talked about Devin Hamilton for Delta Delta Die.
Yep.
He's a North Carolina-based filmmaker who was working as a buyer for Movie Gallery at the time. And he saw the opportunity to break into the market because he was behind the scenes. He knew exactly what these video store companies were ordering, so he knew what they wanted to see. And one of the big things that they wanted to see around this time was slasher films. Slasher films, of course, were having a huge resurgence thanks to the success of the Scream films in 1996, which kind of reimagined them. Now slasher films are all about like hip young talent, lots of like very contemporary, usually new metal music on the soundtrack, and usually some kind of self-aware or self-referential kind of a vibe to it. It was no longer the era of like the masked unkillable monsters. Now it's like sociopaths, like and twisted young people like playing mind games with people.
Sure. And I appreciate the fact that you and I are covering this movie without a guest, because it gives us a little more time to dive into some stuff that we don't get an opportunity to really talk about on this podcast, because you sent me an interesting question when we were watching this movie, which was, when was the last time we watched a full moon movie where people were being killed by another person and not by a tiny terror or some kind of monster? And it was a really great question because, for anybody who knows me, they know that when it comes to subgenres of horror, slashers are my number one.
Oh yeah.
Like that's my bread and butter. When I play horror movie trivia, I know that if there's a slasher related round, I'm going to clean up in that round, just because that's the stuff I consumed the most. And whether it's slashers with a vaguely supernatural element like Nightmare on Elm Street, or even Friday the 13th or Halloween. I mean, I say Halloween supernatural, meaning the franchise, not the first movie, but it gets there.
Yeah.
But like even those, I mean, those were sort of the catalyst. And then I worked my way through a lot of the more obscure titles. And, we haven't really had the opportunity to talk much about slasher movies on this show because Full Moon isn't really known for that. And like it even says, like Devin Hamilton proposing that he had a conversation with somebody from Hollywood Video who said people are still in the market for these post-Scream Dimension films type slasher movies. And so he brought it up to Charles Band, which was never really an avenue that Charles Band wanted to pursue before, because it's further removed. It's almost like a lot of the stuff he was doing in the 80s was almost reactionary to just the pure quantity of slasher movies that were being churned out at that time. Now, I just like any opportunity that I get to talk about slasher movies, I'm happy. I will say, I recently have been reappraising a lot of stuff from the 90s, but it's primarily the early 90s. Like I remember having this thought in my head that like slasher movies died out in the late 80s. And then they weren't really resurrected until Scream, and Scream did the Lord's work by doing this, by getting these things back in people's periphery and getting similar movies made again. I kind of now have gone back on that, where like I recognize the importance of Scream, and don't get me wrong, I love Scream.
Yeah.
But I think, I went back and I looked at all this like weird stuff that people were putting out from like 89 to 94. And it's like, oh, there's a lot of really good stuff here. And I always thought that was just a completely like bottom of the barrel, like early Dimension films, like just dead zone of garbage.
Yeah.
Now I look back and I'm like, man, with the exception of a couple of movies that I've reappraised, like Valentine.
Yeah.
There's just so much trash. Like I think the post-Scream Dimension horror movie kind of like resurgence of like 1997 to probably 2003 or 2004, probably around whenever found footage then popped up and took it over. It's probably my least favorite actual era of slasher movies, with the exception of like a couple Scream sequels and one or two that are worth going back to. I used to hold it up in high regard, and not so much anymore.
I think my problem with that era, it's like not only the diminishing returns and like the people who are not as clever as they think they are, the screenplays that are not as clever as they actually think they are. It's just like even the good ones were kind of making a mockery of the genre. It felt like that was sort of the way that you were going to get slashers back into the zeitgeist, was by like quietly poking fun at everything that sort of makes them special, you know? And I think we've kind of come back around, and we're entering back into a new era of like unironic slashers, which is nice. But there are of the number of Scream clones that were coming out around the 2000s. Shockingly few have endured or been reappraised or been like, you know, or they're not a lot of things that people go back to. There's like people, they're fans of like I Know What You Did Last Summer. They're fans of like, but I don't know anybody who likes Urban Legend. I don't know anybody who
Somebody
likes.
does. So if you like Urban Legend, puppetmasterscastlefreaks@gmail.com.
Yeah,
Let us know what it is about Urban Legend that appeals to you, besides the Robert Englund cameo.
Right. I mean, you've got things like disturbing behavior and all these other things that are just like kind of
theater. That was an awful theatrical experience.
That's some disturbing behavior on your part that you went to the
really
theater for that. But all of this is
I heard Harvey Danger, and I was like, I'm going to go wherever this song wants me to. And
weirdly,
or worse,
I still associate that song with that movie too. I don't know why.
You can't not. It was all in the ad campaign. I mean, it was all over that movie.
Yeah, I mean, and I've heard that song way more outside of that movie, which I saw once kind of while doing laundry or something. Like it was a very like that was not a formative film going experience. I don't remember much of the details of that movie, but I still associate it with Flagpole Sitta, you know, which is the name of that song for people who don't know. I'm not sick, but I'm not well. Flagpole Sitta. But that's a digression. All of this is to say that I think the thing that, and to go back to kind of the question about people killing people in full moon movies. All right. This is something I stumbled upon in the trivia section on IMDb for Bleed. And that trivia comment, which you always need to take with, you know, a massive teaspoon of salt, was saying that Charles Band didn't want to do this movie because he had a strict rule in-house at Full Moon that said all deaths must be taking place at the hands of a creature or a monster or something, and not person on person. And I'm like, okay, well, that's definitely not like a rule, right? We would have come across this at some point, but then we kind of started doing the math, and we're like, weirdly, this adds up. Like very few of these movies do feature like human on human violence, right? Yeah. Like it's, if there is human on human violence, it's because they're like, you know, Shadow Zone or something. They're possessed by a being, or they're being imitated by a being or something like that, but they're still monsters. And then we have things that we haven't covered yet, like Head of the Family, but like they're people, but they're also couched as monsters. They have powers. They're kind of mutated, like, you know, so it's very strange, and it's something that I just had not thought about at all, and it kind of blew my mind. And now I'm trying to think of like, oh, well, damn, okay, how many others am I missing here?
Yeah, no, Full Moon, they have a rule here.
They have a rule here, and we don't. I hope you never follow a rule again. R.I.P. Biff Whiff. That was a bummer.
The thing I love about quoting, I think you should leave with no context, is how easily it turns into two separate quotes in the same exchange.
Yeah, absolutely. And plus, like anytime you do like an out of context, I think you should leave quote like 4 guys in their 40s just appear magically to repeat it back to you. Like, how did you get in my house, sir? Like, get out of here. You know, like, but yeah, all of this is to say, like, this is one of the stranger eras of Full Moon, like a trio of movies. And that's really all Shadow Films was. It was 3 movies directed by Devin Hamilton. All of them not feeling very full moony at all. We already talked about Delta Delta Die, which is the last film in this little arc. And as such, it probably is the one that feels closest to a full moon. I would still argue it feels a little closer to a trauma film than it does to a full moon movie. But this movie, Bleed, it really does not feel like a full moon movie at all. In a very interesting way. When
I was looking ahead at the Shadow Film stuff, I felt like the second movie, Birthright, looked a little bit closer to Delta Delta Die, possibly in spirit. So I thought I didn't want to include it in this episode. We could have probably easily doubled up movies for this one, but I thought they seem very different in spirit from one another. So I wanted to keep Bleed by itself.
But speaking of doubling up on movies, that's what Devin Hamilton did. He was filming this movie and Delta Delta Die at the same time, which is why we have a lot of the same cast members. He probably got Julie Strain to like shoot her bits of Delta Delta Die in the morning and then come in and do
I'm sorry, sir. That is bit singular.
That is bit. Oh yes, excuse me. Yeah, she has one. She has one very brief bit in this movie, which is it's a little jarring, but it's also just kind of like it's like, man, she's just down for anything. She's just going to show
Well,
up.
it's perfect. It's a perfect
Yeah,
Julie Strain moment. It's like, like I
absolutely.
said like I telegraphed in my intro, it's she's sitting in a, plastic lawn chair
Yeah,
outside of a house, topless,
for no reason, for no
for no
reasons
reason,
never
calls attention to
explained.
it. No, it's a great Julie Strain moment.
Absolutely. But, just, so to go back to the production of this, like Devin Hamilton was able to convince Charles Band to basically give him the keys to Full Moon for a couple of films. I got $45,000 in 9 days to make this movie, which is about typical of the time. And Devin Hamilton did not even manage to get his days off work while he was still shooting this movie. So he was working a shift during the day and then coming in at night and doing a lot of the shooting for this, and then picking up the daytime shots on the weekend. So they had to work really, really super fast.
That was a busy weekend then, man, because so much of this is in waning daylight.
Oh yeah, so much so, and like all around a pool. That pool gets like the "and" credit in this movie. But yeah, and then for him to also be doing scenes for Delta Delta Die at the same time, it's like the dude must have been exhausted by the end of this. But yeah, he released I think 3 or 4 films in 2002. Just all in a row. Yeah. But you know what? This movie was a hit, at least relative to its budget. It didn't really cross over with the mainstream, but it was a video store hit. It sold about 3 times what it cost to make, and I believe the same is true of Birthright and Delta. But unfortunately, that trilogy kind of represents the entire Shadow Films era, because the movies, while they were making money relative to what they were spent on, like they just weren't keeping up with the demands of the DVD market, which by 2004-5 was like really, really booming. It was really oversaturated, and it was kind of headed for a bust in a way. That would still be probably about 10 years before that happened. But, it was just, there was too much. There was oversaturation, and it was hard to make a dent. A band decided to go back to what Full Moon does best, and that's kind of stonery creature feature comedies,
Killer confections and evil drug apparati.
evil paraphernalia, as my high school teachers used to call it. We don't want you to have any paraphernalia. I'm like, I don't know what paraphernalia is. But yes, but as for Devin Hamilton, he directed one more film after this, which is a gay love story called Shut Up and Kiss Me, and a few short films, but most of his post Full Moon career has been as an editor. He works on a lot of low budget horror and Hallmark-esque kind of holiday movies, but still working. I think he still edited like 6 or 7 movies last year. So, he's still cranking them out. Yeah. But yeah, this movie is truly strange for a Full Moon movie. I'm going to give it a compliment kind of right off the bat. And it sounds like sort of a half-hearted compliment, but for the context of the show, it's really not. I was never once bored in this movie. And there are a lot of movies that we watch, that even the ones that we like, that are going to have like long stretches of being boring. And that's just due to the nature of low budget filmmaking. Sometimes you just need to kind of like let the camera roll and don't really worry about your pacing so much, So even movies we like the subspecies movies, have chunks that are boring. I was never bored with this movie. That being said, its logic loops completely ate itself in insane ways.
It's trying something, which I appreciate, and I will second your compliment the same way. I think so. I started the movie. You have the cold open with Julie Strain, and then the credits started, and I got really confused because I thought I put the movie on. I thought I was watching a movie, but then I realized I was actually watching a Papa Roach video.
Oh my God. It's so folks, if you watch nothing else from this movie, watch this opening title credits, because this is if the early aughts just kind of threw up on an Avid player and just assembled themselves into random images. I mean, I think the Papa Roach thing is absolutely apt. It's very, it's this all like mishmash of font styles and sizes and like all this like kind of chaotic pop art and terrible like grunge new metal music over the top of it. Like really wild
And
and ridiculous.
we said another movie was like the most 2002 2003 movie in existence, and that
Yeah.
just was thrown right out the window once this title
Oh,
card sequence started for this movie. But you know, it gets going and it introduces the characters, and you know, there's a lot of my least favorite thing that happens when you allow people to just sort of improvise in front of a camera, which is just it's the early 2000s. Everyone, the men especially, just look like a bunch of Abercrombie models.
yeah.
And it's like, okay, well, they're getting together at a pool party, and it's just, what do they do? Sexy hijinks.
Sexy hijinks. I
My
mean,
my least favorite thing, because anytime there's scenes like this in a movie, I think back to, you know, I mean, I would have been 21 when this movie came out, and it's like, we didn't act that way. You know what I mean? Also,
but nobody in the history of humanity has acted the way that these human beings act in this movie. It's bizarre. Like, this kind of feels like an alien interpretation of how young human Americans behave in the early 2000s, because this is so divorced from real human psychology in any way that
it's like somebody just fed all of the MTV original programming into like an AI bot,
right.
and then they wrote, you know, this scene. And so when the characters were being introduced, and we get the sex scene between Debbie Rashawn, Maddie, the character's name, and
Mhm.
Sean, like, okay, we're learning a little bit about them, and then we get the introduction to his friends, these other characters, and the first thing I thought of is like, this is too standard def because I cannot tell who the people are.
Yeah.
They all look exactly the same. So it
Yeah.
takes a minute for me to be like, okay, this is this person, this is this person. I will say that the little bit of personality that comes out does help differentiate, but I would say around the like 25-minute mark or so of this movie, I was really close to just turning on it. Like, I was really close to giving up on it. And then it makes the decision to introduce this murder club aspect to the movie. And I was like, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I like that choice. And then from that point on, there is enough of okay, we've got this pact, kind of, I know what you did last summer. Like, thankfully, they're not trying too hard with the snappity snap Kevin Williamson dialogue
right.
in the movie, but I do think it's like they're pulling these little influences from recent Dimension movies, and I thought, okay, this is kind of its own little low budget twist on this. And then once they had that exposition scene, and from that moment on, I was more on board. I really struggled through the first like 20 minutes probably of this movie.
See, I was on board early on. I mean, so, like we mentioned, Debbie Rashawn plays the lead here, and I think she immediately is kind of popping, and I'm
Sure.
just like, yeah, I really like the choices that she's making. I think, yeah, you mentioned there's a sex scene early on between her and this new guy that she meets, and I'm like, all right, this is kind of like tenderly shot, like they're behaving like they have a little chemistry, like there's some juice here. And then, yeah, they get to this pool party and we meet the friends, and these friends are just like, they're the grossest people. They are like immediately misogynistic, and that includes the women too. Like, and they're these weird kind of like exhibitionists, and like this whole time, she's got her new boyfriend who's this like crunchy haired hunk who's just kind of sitting around like smiling, all shucks, like this is just normal behavior. And then they casually introduce this murder thing. Okay. Now, we've seen one murder in the movie so far. There's a cold open with some unfortunate kind of transphobic humor about characters leaving a Halloween party in drag, sure, and they get gutted by a man in a mask. And that's where Julie Strain pops up for her 1 second cameo, in which she is topless, mentions that she is topless on the phone, and then dies.
And then gets hit in the head with a hammer.
Yes. So we've had the introduction of the murders here. We've also had some kind of hint that maybe Maddie is not 100% sane, that she might have some murderous tendencies, and that she's a little delusional, and that we might need to worry about that going off. But then we introduce this murder club plot, all right? And all of them are sitting around casually talking about how they'll set goals for each other, right? And they have to like go and kill people in order to stay in the club. And Maddie's on board like right away. She's like, "Oh, this makes total sense. I've got murderous tendencies. This is a great way to do this, you know. I found my people." She ends up killing a woman in a parking garage for dinging her car. She bashes her head against a column.
It's so fun. The editing of that scene is so funny because it's like the first bash, the woman is like mildly rattled, and the second bash, her head just explodes like a watermelon.
I mean, it's crazy. Like they actually have a couple of good like gore scenes in this, you know, like
the gutting scene in the beginning. I actually will say the cold open. I said I was a little bit turned off by the beginning of this movie. I should say the first act minus the cold open. The cold open actually had me. I was like, okay, cool. This is a masked killer. And then the gutting happened, and I went, okay, cool. There's some prosthetics and some blood there.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
Yeah, no, and he stabbed the guy dick first. Like that was kind of a brutal move to go after a guy early on in this movie. But this is where we start getting like some problems with the twists, okay? Because this is a movie that loves a twist. It loves to break them out every a couple of minutes just to kind of keep you on your toes. Now we learn that the murder club was a joke, okay? There is no murder club. None of them have ever murdered anybody, allegedly. You know, and I was trying to meet this movie halfway. I'm like, okay, so this idea that there's a slasher and he's stalking a club full of murderers is kind of an interesting one, right? Like it's who's the murderer when everybody's a murderer, you know, like it's a bit of an obvious twist, but that's interesting. But now we're twisting into something else entirely. None of them are murderers. They just sat around telling a weird, lengthy, improvised, unfunny joke to prank the guy's new girlfriend.
Well,
and then they just let it sit there.
Right. And it seems so premeditated. Like it seems so rehearsed.
Like what
so
is
it's
the
like I want to know how many people have they done this to? Like how many people have been given the murder club story and then just were like, oh, no thanks, and never went back to another pool party.
Like what is their end game with this? Like, is the joke that they hope they're going to trick somebody into killing somebody, or at least trick somebody into admit that they want to kill somebody?
So this was the first time and they were just real successful.
Yeah, it's just random guess, and they're like, wow, yeah, this joke really went gangbusters. I am laughing already. It's that's where it lost me, because I'm like, all right, the logic of this movie is so completely divorced from how human beings think and behave and how jokes work. And
we may not know what the end game as it pertains to the murder club is, but I think it's clear that the end game of the people in this movie and the people making this movie, the end game is to rip a couple dudes' bathing suits off.
Oh man, is there more? There's more male nudity in this movie than maybe anything outside of a David Dakota film. Like,
there's a lot of Dakota tendencies in this movie.
There are.
I said before, they look a lot like Abercrombie models. They're all beefcakes. It's like this is an interesting time where, like you said, the people getting hired in those Dimension movies, they were not your average looking people, which most slasher movies, you go back and you look at ones from the 80s and maybe even stuff into the early 90s. And yeah, I think, your final girls and your female cast members generally are conventionally attractive, but there wasn't necessarily a prerequisite for the men in the movie.
Yeah.
Until this one. And there's a couple of things made me laugh though. One, there's a scene where one of the guys is standing up and he gets pantsed next to the pool.
Mm-hmm.
And they do a wide shot and it's like him with his butt out and it's like he's clearly naked. And then they cut to like a close up where he's talking to the characters and he's still supposed to be naked, but there's about an inch of yellow bathing suit around his waist.
Oh yeah, clearly still wearing. Yeah.
Yeah, then it cuts back again to another shot from far away and he's naked again. And I thought that was a pretty funny continuity error. And then I don't know if this was intentional or if this was how this was supposed to be framed, or if it was an accident, or if it's a reference to something. But this guy, like, straight up Basic Instincts the crowd.
Oh,
where
God.
He puts a towel on and he sits with his legs open, and it's sort of like you can kind of see like his junk, and then he he like it's almost like the camera cuts back and then back to him, and he like shifts himself in a way that kind of presents it even closer to the camera. It was really funny. It had me laughing. Like I don't know if that was intentional, if it was just like they didn't realize they caught it, or what it was, but this movie really preoccupied in a lot of ways with showing off the bodies of these guys. Less so with the women. I mean, you get Debbie Rochon topless, you get Julie Strain topless. I don't think you get the girl Laura topless, and then you don't see much of Tilly except for when she takes her shirt off in one scene. But
that's how she introduces herself,
which is a great.
She comes in like that's her like I guess she's going for like the mean girl vibes or whatever, but she comes over, she takes her bikini top off and says, "Welcome to my orgy." And then it's just kind of like mean and aloof the entire rest of the movie. It's like I can't imagine, like I would just be skedaddling if somebody was like, if I came up to a pool party and someone's like, all right, like even if you're joking, the vibes here are aggressive and weird and I'm gonna leave. Yeah, like you know. And then you have Chris, who is played by Alan Neighbors, who's the tall kind of douchebaggy one, you know. And this character is just repulsive to me. Like his entire
he really is, and I have a lot of thoughts about this guy.
Yeah.
One
what
is
a tool.
The guy's name is Alan Neighbors, and so there's no proof of this, but I am going to say he is clearly a descendant of Gomer Pyle.
Obviously, yeah. I mean, there's that one moment in this movie where he just starts going, Galveston, oh, Galveston. Yeah.
Shazam.
Shazam.
He ask your grandparents. But there's that, and I was like, okay, I feel like but he also, it's like he is a very in shape, like muscular man, but he has this weird kind of goofy look where the best way I could describe what he looks like is like it's midnight and a fairy godmother just started turning an Abercrombie model back into Harlan Williams.
Kinda, yeah. That's exactly right. It's like he was chained to the wall so he wouldn't become Rocket Man. You know? Yeah, that's actually really that's astute. That's, you know, but I'm gonna spoil the end of the movie here. Okay, Chris is the killer. All right, he was the killer the whole time. And he's like kind of the obvious killer from the get-go because he's the one.
Not the first person killed. He becomes the obvious killer.
Exactly.
You're like, this guy is so fucking annoying. If he's so annoying immediately, then he's clearly the killer.
Well, and he's trying for like a Matthew Lillard in Scream kind of energy, right? Like the kind of wild card douchebag, but like Lillard could make that charming still, you know, like or at least engaging. And this guy just made me hate this character, you know, and he's just being this douchebag, even when they're like revealing, like, guys, she actually killed somebody because of our prank. I feel so bad. We have to be loyal to her. I'm like, first of all, where is this loyalty thing coming from? Like, you guys swore an oath. It's like, and I should also mention there's just like two other friends who are just there and constantly making out and like don't really have characters.
If they'll be this loyal to a total stranger, just think what they'll do for their actual friends.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God, yeah. And it turns out they kill each other a lot and backstab each other and all kinds of crazy twists. You know, so we're still not totally done with all the twists yet. I think I need to talk about the most insane one, the most problematic one, the most underthought, let's say. And it does involve a friend of the show, Brink Stevens, who is very, very good, and Lloyd Kaufman, the head of the Troma Studios, who they both show up in flashbacks as Maddie's parents, who keep, you know, throughout the movie, their voices are ringing in her head. You're a murderer, you're a murderer, you're a murderer. It turns out the murder that she committed was a teenage abortion. Okay. So this whole time, Maddie has been internalizing herself as a psychopath who's like a spree murderer. And in fact, she's never killed anybody. She had an abortion when she was in high school and has internalized some of that religious shame. And I was just like, what the fuck are we trying to say here? Like, what is going on? This is not the movie to introduce this topic to. This is not the venue with which to have this discussion. What are we doing here, guys?
Yeah, it was a choice. It was an interesting choice. And, it's telegraphed early in the movie too, because she's having these kind of nightmares. And in a scene that before I understood the context of why, there's a scene where she's opening a congratulations card
Yeah.
from her parents, and her monologue is, why would they do this? And I was like, wow, like she's wondering why she got a supportive gesture from her parents. Like, where she was like, they would never do this. And I was like, I really wonder where they're going to go with that. And I knew that Brink Stevens was going to be there in a cameo. I knew Lloyd was going to be there in a cameo. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna assume those are gonna be her parents, but if you would have given me 15 straight minutes uninterrupted to guess in what capacity, I don't know that I would have gotten there.
No, no way. No way. Like it's just such a wild turn, and the movie doesn't really know what to do with this new information because like Maddie is now a murderer. She has actually killed a human being. Which just kind of seems to go away. This plot never really comes back. It also seems to be fairly separated from the slasher movie that's also going on. Like the Murder Club and the slasher movie never really overlap until the reveal that like one member of the Murder Club was actually the killer. But like,
right, there's all this inner turmoil going on with Debbie Rochon, but it's like then when the masked killer does appear, the killings feel so inconsequential because it's like yes, it's people from the Murder Club, and yes, there's kind of a little bit of a mystery of like, okay, well, we know it's not Maddie, but she has these tendencies. Is this really happening?
yeah,
Who would be picking these people off? Like those questions, it seems less interested in really kind of putting together any who done it for the audience really to figure out. It's very, very, they feel inconsequential comparatively. It's like all of a sudden this mask killer just shows up, which by the way, let's talk for a second about this mask.
yeah,
So I want to say Ryan Murphy ripped this off completely.
sure.
For Dr. Quentin Costa, the Carver in season 2 of Nip Tuck.
Oh, excuse me, that's season 3.
Well, the Carver is introduced in season 2.
You're right.
They
You're
don't
right.
reveal
They reveal
who it is in season 3.
Would you
if
believe
you've never
the most
watched,
obvious guy?
right? If you've never watched Nip Tuck, I think the statute of limitations of 20 plus years to spoil who the Carver was in that. To this day, though, I will say it is a very lame reveal, but the season 2 finale of Nip Tuck gave one of the few moments where I legitimately screamed and stood up and turned around because I couldn't look at the TV.
Yeah.
It's a great misdirect. It got me completely.
Yeah.
And for anybody who realized what they were doing beforehand, my hat is off to you because it's one of the few moments where I audibly shrieked at something that a TV show did. And I will say, you know what, that Carver reveal is not that impressive, and it's very obvious. But those first 3 seasons of Nip Tuck,
oh look, I was with you. Like I think the Carver storyline when that was revealed was when I stopped with that show. I'm like, all right, yeah, and it's kind of when I stopped with Ryan Murphy in general, just because I can't deal with his style. But like, yeah, those first 3 seasons felt very taboo. They felt very I was dialed into how campy and dumb it was. Like always, I was never like really taking it at face value or as like prestige TV. It was just about like how much can we get away with on like basic cable.
Yeah, I loved it for that.
Yeah, no, and it was really trying to push a lot of those boundaries. But man, did they ever jump the shark on that show? Like, yeah, they jumped so many sharks into so many different other sharks' mouths. It just got out of control after a while.
Yeah, I like the design though. I think it's sort of perfectly vague and expressionless enough that you can do a Dimension style DVD cover like they did for the cover art for this movie, and it could fly off the shelves if people are looking for another kind of masked killer slasher movie at that time. I was getting vibes of like I think it's The Mask also in Valentine. if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
And then this really obscure movie that I think I've brought up on the show before, Anders Palm's movie Unmasked Part 25,
Okay.
which is a really great movie if you ever get a chance to seek it out. It's a British movie, I believe, and it's about a serial killer who's out killing people, and he's got like a disfigured face, and he wears a very nondescript white mask, almost like if Jason's goalie mask had no accents or details on it. But while he is there, he ends up sort of like forming a relationship with a would-be victim and having an existential crisis as to why he's doing what he's doing. And it's a ton of fun, and it's just one of those movies I feel like I bring it up sometimes. I guess maybe never really on this show, but if you ever get a chance to watch it, it is goofy and funny and just such a weird, welcomely original meta take. And it came out, this is 1988, so it would have been sort of right at the crest of that wave before it all kind of fell apart for slasher movies. But definitely check out Unmasked Part 25. I felt like this was as good a show as any to introduce this movie, because we've got a very nondescript, almost porcelain looking mask, and the last thing it was giving me was occasionally the maybe I was just forming this in my head, but like the doll face from Deep Red.
Yeah, a little bit. It's clearly, I think they're going for the same thing that Scream went for, which is just let's get a generic like Spirit Halloween store mask and try and make it iconic. So like this one does not look like they spent even as much money as the Scream mask. It's just kind of like this blank visage with, I think it's weird that it has ears. Right? Is that weird to me? I don't know. Maybe I haven't been clocking. Like Michael Myers obviously has ears on his mask, but there's something weird about the mask having ears. I don't know.
Well, I mean, we know there's an inconsistency in mask, right? Like, I'm assuming they used one mask for all of this, and it is weird that it has ears. But I mean, if we're talking about Michael Myers, he had blonde hair at one point.
Yeah.
One scene.
So. Yeah, why not? I mean, we're going, and there's always going to be those inconsistencies. I didn't even shout out the amazing boom mic that popped up earlier in the film, and alongside all the highway noise, so there was.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
You didn't catch that? It was third billed person in the credits.
Yeah, boom mic. Yeah.
and boom mic as Boomy.
As Boomy Michaels as Boom. I mean, like that, we didn't mention like this movie had two directors. The other director was Dennis Peterson, who is a longtime editor of Full Moon movies, and Charles Band just basically had him on set to help out and kind of supervise, because Devin Hamilton had never directed a film before. So things like that happen, and things get missed. But by the time they kind of reveal that Chris is the killer, like they've already shifted his character like 4 or 5 times to kind of necessitate the plot, because we're supposed to suspect Sean, who is the quote unquote like nice guy, the boyfriend, and he's the most obvious, the killer, or the most obvious red herring at the very least. So we're meant to think it's him. And so in order to do that, she needs to kind of partner with Chris. And in order for that to happen, his entire personality has to change to be tolerable. And this is where we get a glimpse of his apartment, where I saw just an overwhelmingly full basket of remote controls on his coffee table, and whatever reason I could not stop thinking about what all those remotes go to.
Listen, man,
in a 2002 apartment
22 years ago, 23 years ago, you need, not everybody was lucky enough to have that universal remote. Like you had a lot of consoles.
It's true.
You had a TV, you had a cable box, you had a VCR, maybe you had a DVD player.
TiVo was on the horizon. Yeah.
I mean,
I like to think that this character just doesn't know that you can buy batteries separately, and so every time his battery dies, he just buys a new remote and just keeps the spent ones in the basket, because they all looked kind of similar too. It's like, I don't know. I'm just like, that's way too many remotes. And I'm a guy with a lot of controllers and remotes and things around my house, but I've got 2. All right. I've got one for the TV. I've got one for the sound bar, and that's kind of all you need. I don't know. Simplify is what I'm saying. Feng shui. Do those spark joy? Get rid of some of those remotes. Chris the murderer.
And speaking of set dressing, I'm curious if you caught more of these than I did, but you better believe that in the background of one of these scenes there is a nice big crash and burn poster framed.
Oh yeah, no, there were definitely a few of these. I'm almost entirely certain that the shots of them at work, doing whatever obtuse job that is that they do, were absolutely in the Full Moon offices, because the walls of that place were lined with Full Moon posters. And they don't mention what it is they actually do, but she gets a nice big office and immediately starts hooking up with her boss, like day one, dating her boss.
That's the guidebook, man. That's how you
That's
do
the
it. It's how you
guidebook.
climb that corporate ladder. I think I was trying to look closely to see if I could make out anything else that was set dress there, but I really couldn't see anything. I just got a glimpse of the crash and burn, and I was like,
Yeah.
okay, I can tell what that one is. Uh, and I know there were other full moon movies. So if again, second time we're throwing the gauntlet down to you listeners, if you know what other movies were framed in the background of this office, please puppetmasterscastlefreaks@gmail.com.
I definitely
'Cause
saw a few. I didn't write them down, and I should have, but yeah. But
I
yeah,
think,
yeah.
well, I was going to say, we brought up before, because Steve, I feel like you're similar to me in a lot of ways where I think you have a proclivity towards slasher movies also.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're my go-to genre as much as they are yours. I'm probably more of like a monster movie guy. Like if I had to pick like one genre I get really hyped about, but I do love a slasher movie. Yeah.
So I was gonna ask you then, since we don't have the flexibility within the show to do this very often, like what's your short list of kind of favorite slasher movies?
Oh, damn. Okay. Yeah, that's a hard one. I was not prepared for it. I mean, I do have a lot of the boring ones that everybody has.
Sure.
Halloween has obviously got to be on there, and Friday 6, I think, is my go-to. I vacillate between 6 and 4, but I think ultimately 6 is the best one. Freddy is kind of, I don't even think of Freddy as like a slasher in the same way that I do as like Michael Myers. I don't know, because he's so like fantasy oriented and he's like, yeah, very expressionistic and very weird. I'll shout out like kind of a smaller one that I remember really liking. It's kind of a pseudo mockumentary called Behind the Mask: The Rise of Leslie Vernon.
Oh yeah,
I've really watched that movie a lot. I find it very charming and very funny, and I like
totally.
that it's got this crazy turn for the final act that kind of culminates everything together. Yeah, I'm trying to think of the best one I've seen recently. Mike Flanagan's Hush was really, really good in terms of, I mean, and that's like a 10-year-old movie at this point, but I'm thinking of more recent ones.
See, my brain doesn't do. My brain goes back to the '80s
Yeah.
immediately
Oh, yeah.
because that whole everything that came out in the wake of Friday the 13th, essentially, which was capitalizing off the success of Halloween. There's just so many of them. And that's sort of my bread and butter. I mean, I think
Yeah.
I've said it before, and we've had Brink Stevens on the show. I've talked to her about it, and she's in this movie, so it applies. But I mean, Slumber Party Massacre, the first two Slumber Party Massacres, very different movies. But the first Slumber Party Massacre is a movie I absolutely adore. Probably on my short list of favorite movies. I love the original My Bloody Valentine.
Yeah.
There's other ones too that stand out, as being when they were trying to do something slightly different. So you could take like Fred Walton in between making When a Stranger Calls movies, made April Fool's Day.
Oh, yeah. A movie I don't love, but I appreciate its audacity, and I appreciate that it's trying something weird and different. So, yeah, I can't say I love that movie, but it's doing something weird, And I mean, like movies like the original Black Christmas, which is kind of the prototypical slasher, like that movie grows for me every time I watch it. Like I really I find it more alarming and more scary every time I see it. And something about the fact that it predates all of the genre tropes. So there's no real safety in that. Like you can't really game out exactly what's going to happen because it's this prototypical experience, I think that just makes that movie feel kind of dangerous and kind of cool.
There's I like, and then the ones that get covered sometimes in horror docs, like Madman or stuff like that. And then there's even an Italian one from 1981 called Madhouse. which
Okay,
is
yeah.
a wild movie,
Yeah.
absolutely wild movie, like one to seek out. And like, I like Hello Mary Lou Prom Night 2 more than the
I was gonna
original
say,
Prom
yeah,
Night, even
does
though I
that
wouldn't
one
really call that a
count?
slasher movie. But if we're talking about the original kind of Jamie Lee Curtis run, I have a soft spot for Terror Train.
Yeah, Terror Train is interesting. It's never been one of mine, but it is again another movie I respect for its audacity because that one has a couple of twists in it that will really kind of melt your brain. It's deeply insane. Yeah, and I'm trying. I mean, I guess the big name in slashers these days is Terrifier, right? Which I've just never really been a
Yeah,
super
not really for
Terrifier
me.
guy. Like I appreciated some of the craft of like the second one. I didn't see the third one, and the first one I just thought was like too misogynistic and too kind of outwardly gross. So that one didn't really
Agreed.
do much for me. Like Long Legs didn't really do much for me.
Nope, me
No,
neither.
yeah, which like a lot of the big recent ones. I don't know I don't know how you constitute like X and Pearl and movies like that because they're kind of slasher adjacent, but they're not really, but
I would
they're an
say
interesting
X. I would say X
deconstruction.
is more.
X is definitely more of one. Yeah, yeah, for sure. But there's some interesting stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
but
then like
there hasn't
just
been like a really great one in a while. I don't think maybe the last great one is You're Next for me. I don't know, something like that.
sure. I mean, I guess maybe we're sort of playing a little fast and loose with the definition of what you would call them. But I could say like
Yeah.
your next, I think, has a lot of elements. But then like it doesn't really matter what mood I'm in. Like I can sit down and I can put on Sleepaway Camp or
Yeah.
Pieces or one of the crazy, all the craziest of those. And I'm always sort of in the mood for just sort of how out there they are. I mean,
Oh, you know
I
what
don't.
rules is The Burning. The Have you seen The
Yeah,
Burning? Yeah, I
yeah.
like
I
I
don't
like The Burning.
as much as I don't like to give credit to Harvey Weinstein for anything,
I know. Oh yeah, that is a shame. Yeah, yeah, that's his the origin of evil in a lot of
but
ways.
it's
Yeah.
right. But it's
But it's
really
a
good,
it's an
and
effective scary movie.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, anyway, it's been fun to be able to talk about some of these because
Yeah.
this is the stuff that this is what gets in the way of me watching new movies a lot of the time. I'll have anytime I have time off of work or something, I have these grand plans where I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to go to a matinee of this movie. I have the whole day to myself. I'm going to go do this. No, I'm going to end up sitting on my couch and watching Slumber Party Massacre 2 for
Yeah.
the 400th time.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I'm like, all right, I need to watch The Brutalist. I'm finally gonna sit down and watch The Brutalist. It's this big important movie, and I'm just like, oh, or I can watch Tremors again. Yeah, come on, Tremors. Tremors is good. But yeah, Bleed, fascinating, really entertaining, fun to kind of dissect and break down. I think it's the logic of it and the insanity of it makes it pretty distinctive and pretty fun, even if it's nuts and doesn't make sense at all. But I had a pretty good time watching this movie. I was very entertained the entire time. I genuinely did not know what twist it was going to take next, and I'll give it credit for that. Like even if the twists don't really make it much logical sense, I did not see them coming.
No, I would agree with that. And I think it was nice. It was a nice change of pace to get something like this that is clearly influenced by stuff that I generally enjoy and not have it be a tiny terror or a monster movie in that way. I know we don't get a lot of breaks from typical full moon fare in that way. So as lacking as some of this might have been in certain aspects, the fact that it was in some ways a more straightforward slasher, or at least something trying to capitalize on the success of a masked slasher, made it easy to get through the 85 minutes.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's pretty breezy and it's pretty easy to watch, even if it's deeply insane. But that concludes our episode on Bleed. Where could people find us if they want to learn more about this silly little show that we do?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked, Steve. I thought maybe you weren't going to.
I
If
thought about
you,
not. I thought about
yeah.
not. I prayed on it.
If you want to keep up with the show, you can follow us primarily on Instagram at puppetmasters_Castle Freaks. You can follow me at _Giallo_Jared or Steve at Minotaur Matador. What would be really helpful if you enjoy the product that we bring out to you every single week now for 100+ consecutive weeks
Oh,
without
yeah.
having missed one. You can jump onto Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave us a little 5-star rating, maybe a brief review if you feel so inclined to do so. I think a lot of people don't necessarily think to do that, but it really helps the show see a lot more people that way. The more exposure it has, the more ratings and reviews that are there. So that would be
Absolutely.
just a way that you could help us out. You can also follow what we're up to on Threads or Blue Sky just by finding the show name, and listen to audio versions of the show on YouTube if you just find the show name and our channel there. Yeah, we'll keep you updated with everything that's going on. And if you have questions, comments, feedback, anything like that, as I'm saying now for the third time in this episode,
Mhm.
puppetmasterscastlefreaks@gmail.com is just a nice way to let us know how you found the show, what you're enjoying about it, if there's something you'd like to see us do that we're not doing so far, something that you'd like to see different. Feel free to reach out to us. We enjoy getting emails from fans, and occasionally we'll read one on the show also. So definitely do not hesitate to contact us, and you can also leave comments on Spotify episodes. So if you're listening to it and we mispronounce something or leave out a piece of integral information, you can type it in the comments with all capitals and tons of exclamation marks, and maybe even direct some choice words our way. And we will get that feedback. But, doing all this stuff for the show is a lot of work, but it's not the only show that Steve does a lot of work for. Steve, what else have you got going on?
Well, I have another show called Cinema Arcade. That is cinema and arcade mashed together. That is what we do. We are watching movies and then playing the games based on those movies. And we're in a real weird run at the moment, which is going to be several weeks ago when you're listening to this episode. But we just released an episode on Disney Pixar's Up. So naturally, the movie we had to follow that with was Spice World, obviously. And I'm getting ready to do an episode about the movie City of Lost Children, which, yes, has a PlayStation 1 game.
Wow.
Deep cut. If you're not familiar with that movie, it's really cool, but definitely check it out. And then we've also done recent episodes on things like Manos, The Hands of Fate, and the Star Wars trilogy, and a whole bunch of other things. And we've got some real weird ones coming up for you in the next few weeks.
That's amazing, because where else are you going to get content about the Star Wars trilogy and Manos, The Hands of Fate in the same, monthly stretch on the same show? That's
In
all
the
I'm
same
saying.
feed. Yeah. Very few, very little other opportunities for those properties to cross over.
Sure.
And be sure to tune in to us next week, because we are talking about a very recent film that we have not seen yet, and I'm excited to check it out. It's a movie called Amy the Visitor, and Amy is spelled with an AI, and that AI is capitalized. I don't know what this movie's about. Can you guess?
No, I mean,
No.
if only they would give us some sort of subtle clue.
Yeah, if they could tip us off in some way about what the threat of Amy the Visitor is. But that's going to be a fun one. I'm excited to check that out.
Yeah, no, I am too. That is another recent full moon movie. I don't think it predates the pulp noir, but it is very recent in stuff that they've been putting out. So I'm always excited to see, how the company is shifting and what the modern product is really like.
Yeah.
I've found stuff to admire in some of the newer things that we've watched, but I'm also saying that there's limitations and things that I'm wondering if they're going to kind of course correct or how they're going to do things. So
Yeah.
I'm also looking forward to getting into Amy the Visitor next week. So make sure that you stay with us, and thank you again to everyone who listens week after week, and we will see you next time.